Hi everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Antoine Baillargeon, and I'm the program coordinator here at the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the branch office is located is traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And on behalf of the Ottawa branch, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on heart health, presented by Meg Stickl-Kroeker, owner of local business Aim Fitness, and guest speaker Moyra Lauzière, who is a volunteer for the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So Meg specializes in fitness for adults over 50 and has been working in this field for over 15 years. And we are proudly in our third year collaborating with Meg, and we offer our members monthly webinars with Meg. Today's webinar with Moyra will touch on the heart attacks and how to deal with them, and as well as strokes. And we'll also touch on risk factors for both those things and support for survivors and caregivers. So, veuillez noter que le webinaire sera présenté en anglais, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. I do want to give a special welcome today to anyone who is not yet a member of the association. We hope that these webinars will inspire you to join us. And to our members, we hope that these webinars will encourage you to maintain your membership with us. Remember, you can always give the gift of membership. After today's webinar, the Ottawa branch will send you an email with instructions on how to access the recording and give you some contact information for Meg and the Heart and Stroke Foundation. There will be a question and answer period. There will be opportunities for your questions to be answered throughout the presentation as well as at the end. So please leave any questions you have for our presenters in the chat box throughout the presentation. Okay, that's it for me. So I'm going to turn over the presentation over to Meg.
All right, thank you, Antoine, and good to see everybody here today. So I want to welcome our guest speaker, Moyra. So Moyra is a long-term volunteer for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, doing heart health presentations and displays and coordinating these activities for the Ottawa area. And 2 years ago, she started doing presentations and displays for health partners and presents on a number of different health topics. Moyra is retired from the public service, where she worked for over 30 years, managing projects and programs, many of which involved people with disabilities. And she also works for the Ottawa Safety Council as an adult crossing guard. So it's great to have you here, Moyra, to speak about heart health, as we are in the month of heart health. So thank you so much for speaking to us on behalf of the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Meg, and bonjour tout le monde, welcome. We are going to share a presentation that I'm going to give you today, and let us hope this all works, technology being what it is, it usually does. Okay, now, I guess just as a bit of intro, between Antoine and Meg, they've pretty well told you what you need to know about me. I'm just very happy to be here, and I thank them very much for the invitation to come talk about a topic that I consider extremely important, especially in the age group that you guys and I am. I'm also retired, as you know, so in this age group, in any age group, we want to know how to take care of our heart. But in this age group, it becomes even more important to do these things well. So I'm glad of the opportunity to do it. Now, this being a virtual presentation, the way you're going to ask your questions, or you're going to use the chat. Most of you, I'm sure, know how to use it, but if you can't see it automatically, there's a screen that will show either the top or the bottom, and just click on it. It'll open a screen and you can put in your question. Si vous voulez mettre votre question en français, s'il vous plaît, sentez-vous libre de le faire. What will happen is, at a couple of points in the presentation, I'm going to break, and Meg is going to be watching the questions, and I will ask her if there are any in the queue, and if there are, I'll answer them as I go. I would ask you not to ask me questions that are about your particular medical condition. One, I'm not a medical professional, so even if I can't answer the question, I'm not going to try. But the other piece of it is, you are a whole person. I'm giving you good general information, but in fact, the best person to ask you about your health and your issues are your healthcare providers, so please do it. So without further ado, let's go. This takes approximately an hour, give or take, on your questions, and hopefully we can get through them in the presentation. If not, we'll commit to send them to you by email if we run out of time. All right, so let's see if this works. Oh, I hate this when technology does not do what you want it to do. Please. Go. No, no, no. Okay, I'm going to unshare for a second and share again, just to make sure, because it for some reason is not it's not letting me go. Let's just try it again. Try it there. Try it that way. Voila, good, it works. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, Antoine has kind of taken you through it, so I won't repeat myself. The couple things I will add to what he said is across this presentation, because we have been in a pandemic for a couple of years, I will be throwing in a couple of things that are more pandemic specific. So know that as we go. So let's go. First of all, on heart and stroke, just a couple things. One of them is we've been around for a long time, since 1952. So heart and stroke is actually older than me. We've been investing for a long time in research, $1.5 billion, if you can imagine, coming from the generous donations from people like you guys. And it's done a lot. In the time heart and stroke's been around, the death rate for heart disease and stroke has diminished by 75%. So you're talking a lot of death. So we fund a whole lot of researchers to do a whole lot of good work. And what they're specifically doing are two really things. One of them is the research that's going to get us the new drugs, the new treatments, the new procedures, all of the stuff it takes to make the conditions more livable. The other piece that's equally strong, if you look at the amount of money, it's even more, is on advocacy, convincing the government to have better regulations on salt, labeling, all kinds of things like that that really matter, and health promotion. What we're doing today, all the stuff you've seen on TV and all over the place, are all important to make sure that people know what they should be doing to take care of their heart. So what are we in a dynamics here? 1.6 million of us are dealing with heart disease and stroke. A lot of people touched. We have a heart attack every 7 minutes. We have a stroke every 9 minutes. And we have cardiac arrests every 13 minutes. So you can imagine a lot of people are touched by this stuff. Add another troubling statistic to this, and you will have heard of this in the media. Every 20 minutes, a woman dies because of heart disease. And it's now the leading cause of premature death of women in Canada. And when they get hit in a more deadly fashion than for men. Now, why is that? Very simply, because we don't know enough. In 2013, there was a study at the Heart Institute that was very troubling to everyone because it said that women don't always get chest pain when they have a heart attack. And everybody sort of stepped back and went, ugh, that's not good, because people rely on the symptoms we've known, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the point is, some women were different. So in 2014, a bunch of people came across Canada, other people came around the world to try and figure out, what do we do about this? Because in fact, they realized that they didn't know a lot about women, because when they did studies, the big ones people relied on, there was no gender break. So they had conclusions, but nothing that specifically looked at a woman. So this is much improved by what heart and stroke research is funded, etc. But to this day, 2/3 of the research is still focusing on men, which leaves us with a conundrum, is that women are underdiagnosed and undertreated. Certain tests that work quite nicely when we're talking about a man suddenly don't work that well for women, so they're not picking up the stuff as well as they should be. Now, this is getting better. We've paid a lot of money over the years to fund research, and some really good stuff is coming out. For example, Dr. Tai Kuniho, who is from the Heart Institute and who leads the National Network for Women's Heart Health, has a procedure here. And it's interesting because people have aneurysms near their heart. And an aneurysm, if it bursts, is a very major big deal. Well, women weren't being picked up as well on aneurysms because she realized that they were worried about it based on the size of what was here, that big circle that you can see. And so if it bursts, it's a big deal. But women are not as big as men by and large. So our vessels can be smaller, things can be different. And so she's developed a technique which, instead of worrying about the size, thinks more about the elasticity. And now women can have a test that will detect better. Dr. Yu, who's a stroke specialist, is talking about how to differentiate when women come in and potentially have a stroke. And they've got so many other things going on that the stroke symptoms are often missed. So they're looking, both of them and others, at ways to identify what's happening in a woman and how are we going to know sooner before they get sent home from emergency and either die or something happens. And the worst of it is, if women If you asked a woman what's the greatest killer of women, they would say breast cancer. But I present on other topics, and I know that breast cancer doesn't really kill a whole lot of people because most of it's detected at stage 2. And at stage 2 cancers, you've got a really good recovery rate. Now, this has gotten a little bit less good because of pandemic, because people haven't been going to emergency rooms and to doctors as much. But still, many, many more people die. Women die from heart disease than die from breast cancer, which is a real surprise when you tell women these things. So they don't know enough. And the last thing in the landscape I wanted to mention talks about cognitive decline. And what that is if you have certain issues of the heart or stroke in this instance, it really adds to your risk of getting dementia. So we've got to be conscious of the fact, and we really want to take care of ourselves to avoid a lot of these conditions, because you end up with a double whammy of, yeah, you've got a physical problem, but you've also got the dementia problem, which none of us really want to get, right? It's not something we're looking forward to. So at the end of the day, it's a big deal. So the idea of people knowing this and the medical community knowing this, because often things are done in isolation in medicine. So there's the heart stuff there and there's the brain stuff there, and they've got to get together better. So we're working really hard with the medical community to make things better. So basically, that's the landscape in which we're working, why we want to talk about these things, because in fact, affects a lot of people, really can change your life if you end up getting heart attacks, strokes, and all the rest. So let's do the education piece. Let's talk about your heart. Your heart is a muscle. It is basically the size of your fist. It is a pump. It basically pumps blood through our body, and with that blood comes the oxygen that the body needs to survive, as well as nutrients. So it's taking the blood, it's shooting it out of the heart through the arteries, makes it through the body, comes back through the veins, bringing back what needs to be cleaned again, goes into the heart, goes into the lungs, gets cleaned up, goes back into the heart, goes back into the body. That happens all the time, 24/7, and that's in fact what keeps us alive. Now you can imagine that to make this work, you need arteries and veins that are in good shape, because if they're not, this job can't happen as well as it needs to keep us alive and to keep us well. What can happen is this. It's called atherosclerosis. It's also called hardening of the arteries. But you can see what's happening, right? It's pretty evident. What we'd love to see is what's at the top of that graphic, which is like nice and clear and smooth. But the reality is, because of plaque, which comes very much because of the fats we eat, the saturated fats particularly, you're talking about walls that have created themselves in the blood vessels, making it harder for the blood to get through. But over and above that, as you'll notice, they're not forming in nice little lines here. There's all these ridges, and all those ridges are good places for a blood clot to form. So what you have here is it's harder for the heart to do its job, because it's having to push a lot harder through arteries that are not doing their job very well, and the blood clot can form. Now, this is the recipe for a heart attack. 90% of people who have these kinds of conditions do end up with a heart attack, because in fact, the heart's working too hard. So what is a heart attack? Well, a heart attack is when the flow of blood is interrupted and the heart can't get enough oxygen to survive. If that's not restored quickly, the heart starts to die, and the longer it takes to restore it, the more damage happens to the heart. And there's a reality there, that it's part of the game that's there. Now, what happens is either there's so much plaque that it's blocked, or that blood clot formed, broke off, and blocked somewhere else. So if anything happens near the heart, we're in trouble. We have a heart attack. Now, how do we know we have a heart attack? Now, you will all see my sort of, oh my God, my chest hurts. And of course, that is a symptom of a heart attack. There's no question. If you guys, any of you have had them, you may well have had this. But you may tweak to something else here, is that we don't always use the word pain. It could be squeezing, it could be pressure, but it's something else that's telling us, you're not comfortable right now. And it might not be right at the heart, which is like the bottom of the breastbone. It might be other parts that are close. So the arm closest to the heart, the jaw, the neck, anywhere like that that's close could also be uncomfortable. So chest discomfort or upper body discomfort. Those are the main ones, but there's other ones that are there too. Sweating, nausea, shortness of breath, lightheadedness. And this is giving us a picture. They might not all be there. Some of them may. But if it happens to you or happens to someone else, you may start to see these things happening and go, oh my God, what's happening here? Now, when we look at a woman is like a man a lot of the time, but what happens if she doesn't get the chest pains? And that's where the worry and all the research is happening. What else can be happening in a woman that would make us realize they're having a heart attack? Pressure or pain in the lower chest or the upper abdomen, the dizziness, lightheadedness, those other symptoms, and upper back pressure. And the one that scares me terribly is extreme fatigue. We women know, and especially when you're younger and we're worrying about these things in women who are younger, they have so much going on in their life that fatigue is almost like a norm for some of them. So when they get sent to hospital with atypical symptoms, they may be harder to find. So in other words, these are the things we're looking for men or women to see if they're having a heart attack. They may not all be there. Some of them may be. You may not be 100% sure. But these are the things we want to act, and we want to act quickly because that time, the longer it takes, the more damage there will be to the heart. So what do we do? Well, 911, no surprise, we call 911, right? That's what we do. What do we do in the meanwhile? Well, the person should be kept as quiet as possible. So sit down, lie down, whatever is comfortable for them. That person might well have had that hardening of the arteries I showed you before. They may well have a nitroglycerin prescription. You take it at that point. People have it. They may also have those baby aspirins you hear about on TV all the time as being the miracle drug because, in fact, they can declot, which is really good. So those two really can help at that moment. If you have nothing else and someone has regular aspirin, that 325 regular aspirin can also help to declot. So that can be given as well. But other than that, we can do nothing. Now, the person's not unconscious at this point. But what happens if they become unconscious? A heart attack becomes much more serious and much more deadly if the person becomes unconscious. And at that point, we call it something else. It's called cardiac arrest. And what's cardiac arrest? Well, basically, the person has stopped breathing. Now, this will come in a heart attack that's gone heart attack to cardiac arrest, but it can also come for other reasons that are more electrical. I'll talk about atrial fibrillation later, arrhythmia, other things will cause it, but the effect is cardiac arrest, the person is not breathing. We have a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes before damage starts to occur, and this is when we have to do something. If we don't do something, that person will either die or have severe damage coming from this attack. So what do? We always hear about CPR. This is the time to use CPR. CPR is for once the person is unconscious. And how does one do CPR? I would hope that you guys across the room, Meg, I'm sure you have CPR, but many of you I'm sure have it. And if you don't, please try and get a course and get it because you can save a life with CPR. Now, we used to have much more complicated methods of doing CPR, and in the medical industry, they do more complicated CPR. But in the community, for a number of years, they've taught us what you can see on the screen here. It's basically simply compressions. The breathing piece of it, if we try and do it as people who are non-professionals who don't know what they're doing it all the time, we don't do enough compression. So they decided at one point that in the community, all we want people to do is compress, because if we can keep the heart compressing, we're stopping it from dying. So therefore, CPR compresses the heart. If you're doing it with a course or even without a course, if you look at the lady that's on the picture, she's on her knees, she's got her arms there with her elbows locked, and she's got her fingers intertwined, and she's placed just about where the heart would be. What CPR is in this position, you press down as hard as you can, twice a second. And if you think of the song, Staying Alive, Staying Alive, Staying Alive, that's what you do. Now, the ambulance has been called, right? So they're coming. In the meanwhile, you push as hard as you can. If you get tired of pushing, and you might, maybe there'll be somebody else beside you who can push as well. But the longer we can keep pushing on that heart, the more we're stopping the damage occurring. Now, the other thing, and you will have seen these, is it has a heart and it has a little thunderbolt. And that means that close to us is what's called an AED, or an external defibrillator. And what that is a box that can be opened by anybody, no training, and it will walk you through doing CPR. But added to CPR, it's got paddles. And you see these in the movies, right? You shock the person, then they come back. And that's not necessarily for the heart attack that turned into cardiac arrest. It may well be for the cardiac arrest that came from something else. But if the heart needs a shock to come back, those paddles will provide it. So in other words, if you're faced with a situation with basically a person you think is having a heart attack gone unconscious, call for somebody who can do CPR. If there's nobody, give it a shot yourself. You can't hurt, you can only help. And anything you can do helps keep the person alive. And by a combination of doing CPR and those AED machines, we can save about 3/4 more people than without them. So in other words, give it a shot if you have to. Okay, now let's quickly look at the brain. The brain is in front of us. It's beautiful. It's important to keep us alive. As you can see from the diagram, it's got all kinds of different functions. And if you look at the occipital lobe on the back, that would help control our vision. If you look at the cerebellum on the front, that would control balance in some of our activities. Now, every part of that brain is doing something. And so therefore, all those functions have to be working at capacity to do it well. Now, what's a stroke? It's an attack on one part of that brain. And you can see the little circle, and then the circle grows and the circle grows. 1.9 million brain cells are dying a minute after a stroke, because in a stroke, what happens is the same thing that happens at the heart, is the blood's not getting through, therefore the oxygen's not getting through, and those neurons will start to die if we don't do anything. Now, if you look at the next slide, it's interesting, because look at the picture and think about the slide I just showed you on hardening of the arteries. We've got plaque and we've got blood clots. So what we have, a stroke is kind of like a heart attack, but in the brain. So all of the brain is full of blood vessels. They're all over the place doing their job. But if they can't do their job because they're blocked, we have something called an ischemic stroke. Now, an ischemic stroke is 85% of our strokes. So most of them, this is what happens. It happens because we have that plaque buildup that's coming mostly from the saturated fats we're eating and doing those things wrong. So if this blocks, it has to be deblocked, or that function that that part of the brain is in will be lost. So if it's vision at the back, the longer it takes to unclot this, the more damage that would occur, to the point that you would lose your vision. So a stroke really has to be found, and found quickly. Now, there's another kind of stroke that's even more severe, and it's called a hemorrhagic stroke. And there's only 15%, so there are less of them. But on the other hand, they're far more damaging than an ischemic stroke, because not only is that part of the brain attacked, but all that blood is flowing all over the place. Because as you can see in the picture, it's not a matter of blocking, it's a matter of bursting. And you're talking something else. This will happen because people have high blood pressure, and there's a lot of pressure on those blood vessels, and they just can't cope, so it bursts. Now, I have a volunteer who had a hemorrhagic stroke, and she's come back from it, so you can come back from these things, but they're much more severe, and it took her 2 years to gain back her functions, and she never got them back 100%. But the point is, strokes don't usually kill you, but they remove function. The only time a stroke will kill you is the part of the brain that's controlling our breathing. If it's not doing its job, it gets attacked. Yes, you can die from a stroke, but more often than not, you're going to lose function, and you're going to lose more function the longer it takes to figure out that you're having that stroke. Now, one clue that you might be having a stroke is something called a TIA. You've heard the term, if somebody said it to you in hospital, transient ischemic attack. It looks and feels like the ischemic stroke I was showing to you a couple of minutes ago, and it is a clotting, but it's a small clot that goes away by itself in an hour, a couple of hours. I've heard sometimes a little bit longer than that, but the point is it goes away. And so that way you don't end up with the stroke, but you end up with a nice warning sign that says, whoa, if you don't do something about it, this may generate into more. And you see people have a TIA, 2 TIAs, 3. But if you don't change something, chances are you'll end up with that full-blown stroke as well. So it's like having a minor heart attack, because some people have minor heart attacks, but the point is you've had a second chance to do something better. So you're lucky in a sense if you have a TIA versus the full-blown stroke. So how can we tell somebody's having a stroke? If I could get you to raise your hands, I will, but I won't. I will tell you. You've seen this, I'm sure. It's been on TV, it's been on social media, it's been all over the place. And it is an easy way to figure out somebody's having a stroke. There are 3 letters in the word fast that become really key. F is for face. Is the face droopy? You will know a face is droopy because by and large the lips are up and down on either side, so it's visible. The second, can you raise both your arms to the shoulder height? If you can do that, it means you have control of your motor functions. If you can't, that may well be a stroke. And the third clue is often the one we get first. Is the speech slurred? Someone who was speaking at a normal rate and suddenly the words are all garbled. That scares you. And oftentimes, and if you've seen the ads, that's what happens. You hear the slurred space. Person turns around, you see the face, and then you can test for the arms. If you see those 3 things, please call 911. Don't drive them to the hospital. These people need intervention quickly, and there is nothing we can do to help them in the meanwhile. When you're talking the heart, there is nitroglycerin, there's aspirin, there's those things. But when you're talking about a stroke, the help they're going to get is going to be in hospital. And you got to get them there as quickly as humanly possible. So 911 as quickly as possible, and we go. En français, c'est vite. Visage, incapacité de lever les bras, et trouble de parole. So vite and fast. Remember those acronyms and do it. And I would caution you that even if you don't see the 3, you see even just the 2, call. Because in fact, ambulance drivers have told me so many times that they would rather be called and it's not than not be called and it is. And so for both a heart attack and for a stroke, please react as quickly as humanly possible so that people can keep life, function, all the rest. Okay, so we're through the heart and we're through the brain. Meg, have we got any questions at this point?
Yes, I will just pull up the chat here. We have a few. So the first one is, how are cardiologists informed about these diagnostic issues for women and what to do? So you mentioned that you guys are working with them.
Yeah, there are actually programs, and there is a slide a little bit later that talks about specific work done towards the medical community so that they will in fact talk to each other in a more cohesive way. And it's a necessary beast because in fact specialties do work in isolation of each other. So education of the community itself through specific initiatives by Heart and Stroke to try and get past that and into another place.
Okay, awesome. There's 2 questions about plaque. One of them is, can plaque be removed through drug therapy? And are there any standard tests that can assess the level of plaque?
To the last question, when you're getting the cholesterol number, and we'll talk about your cholesterol number later, the number of LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, is a good indicator that you're forming plaque. So therefore, that's a good clue by itself. It's not the only thing, but it's definitely the most important thing. Can drug therapy, I'm not aware of drug therapy per se, except that when you've got a cholesterol issue, they do medicate you. So it's probably helping. But one of the things that can help is improving your HDL cholesterol number, the good cholesterol number, through things like omega-3 and exercise and fiber and things like that, which we'll talk about later. But yes, there are ways of helping the cause by doing it. But you ideally don't get there too far because you don't want to get there in the first place by too much saturated fat.
Mm-hmm. Another question about heart attack symptoms. Can back pain be a symptom in women?
Yes, and you noticed it. It's in one of the alternate symptoms. They did talk specifically about pain in the back. And the other thing I heard, and it's not on that slide, it came from a session given by Dr. Kunihu, who I mentioned earlier, and she talked about some types of digestive issues in some women. But this is an evolving beast. They're trying to figure out what are the symptoms and trying to give women as precise information as they can, but they're learning, and they continue to learn.
Good. There's 3 more. The next question, can you break a person's ribs while doing CPR?
Yes, you can. But on the other hand, don't worry about it, because if you've kept them alive, they will be very happy that you broke their ribs. In fact, most of the time we won't, but yes, it's possible. A heavier person on a smaller person, it is possible. But if you're doing it, there's something called the Good Samaritans Act that says, hey, we tried to help. So please help if you can.
Mm-hmm. And there's an expression, life over limbs.
Yes,
life
exactly.
over limbs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Another question here. What actually hurts when one has a stroke?
What hurts? That's interesting. I've never had that question. I'm not sure. I don't want to sort of spend too much time on the question periods here because I won't get enough time to go to the other, but that's what I'm going to take away. Unless somebody else has something in the chat, because there are people around this, there's a lot of people on this call, and if you've had a stroke and want to throw in the chat your own experience, that would be helpful. My husband has had them, my brother has had them, and I've never heard them say pain. So I'm not sure of what the answer to that question is. So if anyone's got a clue to add, and I will take it away anyway, and just see if I can find more off the site, which would give us any more information on that topic. Okay. I think I'm going to go on for a while, and maybe we can take a couple more as we go later, because otherwise I don't want to keep people here for an hour and a half if I can possibly help it. Although maybe you don't mind. But if you were me, much more than an hour on Zoom, we get real tired, right? So the question is, let's try not to go there. Okay, let's get into risk factors, and then after that period, if there's any more questions of the type, I'll take as many as we can while we've got people here. And there goes my camera. No. All right. Oh, okay. If it's only me, it seems to be better. but you've lost me now. Everyone can hear me? Can somebody just unmute and tell me that you can hear me? Make sure we're okay?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I won't worry about my camera then. My apologies to the audience if ever. We've been trying to fix my camera. We thought we had it fixed, and I've only seen it twice go weird, but if it goes weird, I'm still here. Okay, risk factors. Risk factors is really why this presentation is important, because in fact, we are the drivers of our own health to a very large degree, and we can prevent by our actions and by our decisions. 9 in 10 of us have at least one risk factor. It gets worse as we get older, so realistically, sometimes the number is even higher in our senior years. Prevention is knowing those risks and addressing them where we can make a difference. 80% or almost 80% of premature heart disease and stroke can be prevented through healthy behaviors. And the 3 behaviors that really have the most impact are eating well, being active, and living smoke-free. There are others, and we will talk about them, but those 3 triumvirate things really affect. Now, risks come in 3 families in my mind, perhaps half of a fourth. One of them are the risks that you cannot change. Those risks you want to know about. The second are behavioral risks, are all the decisions we're making. The third are some conditions that put us at risk. And the fourth, or the third and a half, are risks that are specific to we women because of some of our lifestyle issues or things that go on in our lives. So let's look at first the ones that we cannot change. As we age in this room, we all know that we're not feeling as good in the morning. The audiologist just told me my hearing is starting to go. Age, our body just doesn't work as well as it could, and it does put us more at risk. For stroke, the age tends to be 65, heart disease a little bit younger, but the point is, to a large degree, these conditions are conditions of older people. But as we look at women, that's not always the case. Sex, or the better word might be gender. Women's risk tends to increase after menopause. We are protected by our estrogen until menopause. After menopause, not so good. So realistically, we're more at risk tied to our menopause. Our family history can put us at risk, particularly for stroke. If people close to us in family, if you think a direct line of mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, even children, have had these conditions young, that's going to put us at risk. Women who've had preeclampsia, which is a condition during pregnancy, more at risk. Your heritage can put you at risk. South Asian, African heritage, Indigenous heritage, people of those nationalities or heritages are likely to have higher blood pressure and higher diabetes. As we'll talk about as we go, are risk factors by themselves. So therefore, these are the things that are in your life. You can't change it. I would add one risk to that is if you've had one condition, you're likelier to have another one after. So that second stroke, that second major heart attack, it's there already. The precondition is there. Now, the lifestyle risks. These are the ones where we can really control things. Are we eating well? Are we active enough? Is our weight a good thing or not? Smoking, we've talked about before. How stressed are we? And the whole idea of alcohol, excessive alcohol, and drug abuse. Now, all of these things we're making decisions on, some every day, some every whatever. But the point is, we can make changes here. The first one, and I consider the keyest one, is eating well. And eating well is something we're going to make decisions on every day, many times in that day. And we've got to make them well most of the time. I mean, if you go to a restaurant once every 6 months, hey, eat anything you want, you'll be fine. But as a habit and as things we do on a regular basis, we want to be thinking about the Canada Food Guide. And the Canada Food Guide and Heart and Stroke, who was part of the creation of the Canada Food Guide, says, eat mostly whole and natural foods. Eat according to that plate that we see on the screen. Many more fruits and vegetables than proteins. So the big steak and the little bit of vegetables, try and turn that around into something a little different. The fruit and vegetables that give us all the vitamins we need, a lot of fiber. And if we can pick them with bright colors, antioxidants, lycopenes, all kinds of things that are super good for us. So lots of fruit and vegetables. We're going to have grains in a quarter of our plate, and the guide says, please use whole grains rather than the white rice, the white pasta, all of that stuff where the hull has been removed. Keep the whole grain, and that's going to give you the fiber that you need to get better nutrition, and fiber helps a whole lot of things, as you will see. So whole grains, Proteins. We all eat proteins. Proteins should fill 1/4 of our plate. But proteins, animal proteins particularly, are a source of saturated fats. Saturated fats create plaque. So bottom line is we want to be thinking about how many proteins we eat and what kind of proteins we eat. So the big steaks, the big chicken breasts, we want to perhaps eat less than what we were eating before. We also want to think of maybe less high in saturated fats. So if you look at red meat compared to chicken compared to fish, red meat is definitely going to be worse. So not too much red meat. But if you want red meat, think bison that doesn't have a whole lot of it, or buy it off a farm where it's grass-fed and it will come down. So think about the proteins that you eat and try and integrate into your life proteins that are not animal. So if you're not getting the animal proteins and the proteins from dairy that are giving you saturated fats, the grains, the legumes, all of those things are giving you protein, but no fat at all, or almost no fat at all, depending on what you take. Some nuts have fats, but again, they're better fats for you. Look for unsaturated fats versus saturated fats. So in the protein family, you've got some decisions to make. Make them thinking about your heart. You'll do yourself some good. Look at the good, healthy fats. Now, those are the unsaturated fats that you're going to see in fish, in avocado, in nuts, in seeds, in all of those things. And those are, in fact, going to increase our good cholesterol number. So we want them in our life. We don't want too much saturated fat in our life. So there's a balance to be made. And the food guide has a little thing on the side of it, and it's water. And it says, keep hydrated, guys. And hydration really matters. It basically keeps all our organs lubricated. And when you go to the hospital and you're not feeling well, often the first thing they'll say is you're dehydrated. We need hydration in our body, and we need to get it from all kinds of sources. If you don't like water, use it, get it from some other source, including milk for that matter, it's fine. But the point is hydrate. So follow the food guide, and think about how you eat, not just what you eat. They say in the food guide, make eating an event. What that means is don't eat it in front of the TV or your computer screen. Focus on it. Make it a meal, ideally with other people, so that we're chatting, we're eating, we're focusing on our food. We can digest better. The brain will know we're full, so we won't take that second helping. There's all kinds of good reasons why eating slower, better, focused is far better for us. So if you integrate those kinds of principles, you're going to do good. And even if it's not 100% of the time, most of the time, try and think of that plate. And in hydration, you guys, many of you are doing exercise. Hopefully, Meg says, if you're doing exercise, maybe you need more water because you're depleting some. If you're in a warm climate or it's humid, you need more. So we don't know exactly how much we need, but we just need a lot. So if you think about it, look at your urine, and the darker your urine is, the more you think you may not be hydrated enough. If you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated to some degree. So try and make water part of your life. And if you don't like water, flavor it, do something to it, have soup, do other things, but hydrate, please. The second one that's important, and you'll know this because Meg told you, is stay healthy, stay active. All of our lives, we need to be active. We have a heart that's a muscle. We have a brain that's a muscle. We have muscles all over the place. And it's a use it or lose it kind of concept where we have to keep moving. Otherwise, our body kind of cracks down and all kinds of things happen. So we want to keep moving. From our heart perspective, and this has not changed for a long time, 150 minutes of physical activity per week is what's recommended. And physical activity that makes you sweat at least a little bit. If you do really high intensity activity, you can do a little bit less than that. If you can only go really slowly because you're not feeling that well and you might have a walker for whatever reason, you might want to do a little bit more than that. But it's in that range that you want to be. And it wants to be across the week. If you did 150 of exercise one day and did nothing the rest of the week, you're not doing your heart any good. It really wants to be exercised on a regular basis, as does the rest of your body. From your heart's sake, you don't have to do it in large chunks. I mean, if you took 150 minutes and split it across the week, you could say 30 minutes, 5 days a week, which is a good thing. But say you're busy, you have all kinds of things in your life. As long as you do 10 minutes at a time and add them up, you're going to get to the same effect and you're going to be able to integrate it into your life. And like anything else, if you can't do it one day, catch it up another day, but keep active. And it's important as we age because more things start to break down. And the more that you can stay active, you're less likely to fall. You're less likely to have a lot of issues that come from not being active. So please be active. And a couple of considerations as we age. Walking is the best exercise to my mind. Swimming equally good because they don't hurt us to the same degree as other exercises could. But if you're going to start new exercises, particularly intensive ones, make sure the doctor is aware and gives you any cautions they need to give you. make sure you have 2 or 3 things you like to do, because if your thing is to walk and it's -40 for many days in a row, well, you might not be able to do some of the stuff you want to do. So have alternatives so that you can stay active no matter the weather or the season, and be safe. Look at the activities, think about cleats and all the other things that will avoid you issues as you stay active. But please, for your heart's sake and your brain's sake, because it's good for preventing dementia, stay active. Now, the third risk comes from weighing too much. And the weighing too much, particularly if it's around your middle. There's an analogy called the apple and the pear. And I've got the apple up there because, in fact, when you carry it as a pear, it's carried on your rear end, and that's not half as bad for your heart. But when you're carrying it on your middle, that's all around your vital organs, including your heart, and it puts pressure, and it's not good. So realistically, this is the weight we want to be concerned about if we can basically bring it down. And it's often brought down through exercise, as Meg might well tell you, because in fact, the exercise can help bring down the waist, which is what we want to do something about. So you can, by reducing your weight, improve your blood pressure, improve your diabetes. If you can take some, basically 4 centimeters off your waist, you can benefit all kinds of things and avoid getting things like, for example, diabetes type 2 or heart attacks or strokes. So keep that healthy weight. Think about the weight that's around your middle. And the other thing I mentioned here, and it's coming from mental health, and it's coming because of pandemic and things that have really got us much more stressed than we might otherwise have been. If you're stressed, think even more about this, because in fact, sometimes it's harder to eat well and stay active, which are the 2 building blocks for a healthy weight, if you're not feeling well. So take care of your mental health as well, and that'll help you take care of your weight. And if you're going to lose some weight, do it by methods that are going to work over time. There are no methods that I'm aware of that are quick fixes that don't end up with people gaining it back. If you can lose it slowly, however you lose it, talk to your doctor, find ways to do it. But the point is, do it slowly, and you can keep it off that way a whole lot better. Okay, so we've talked about 2 of the 3 triumvirates to be that 80% of helping ourselves out. The third is smoking, and smoking should not surprise you as being a bad thing. Smokers are 3 times more likely to have a stroke or die of heart disease. All kinds of things happen when you smoke. You build up your plaque. You might have more blood clots. It reduces the oxygen in the blood already, so it's making it a lot worse for the heart even before all the rest. And so the heart is working a lot harder when you smoke. Stopping smoking is hard. There's no question about it, because there's often both a physical and a mental piece to smoking. So maybe 10% can stop on their own, another 5% if you use Nicorette and that sort of thing. But most people need help. So get help if that's you, from your doctor, the Ottawa Hospital, some really good websites up here called myquit.ca, smokefree.gov. They're all around to help you. But if this is you, please do something about it, and know that it's never too late. After a couple of days, your risk will be reduced already. If you can stay off cigarettes for a year, you can cut your risk in half, and after 10 years, your risk is similar to the risk of a non-smoker. So if this is you, please get smoking out of your life if you possibly can, for your heart's sake. And vaping. Vaping is interesting, right? Because many doctors have sent smokers onto vaping because, hey, they could get off smoking that way. And it started off as a good thing because there wasn't a lot of nicotine in vaping, so therefore it kind of worked. But as vaping tools have evolved, they've added more and more nicotine into the vaping tools. So therefore, you've reached a situation now where it's harder to get off the vape than it would have been to get off the cigarettes in the first place. And I remember listening to a conference one day where this young guy, like maybe 20, kind of thing, who had gone from smoking to vaping to couldn't get off. It was just that much harder. So kids are getting addicted, but adults as well, because doctors have said, hey, it's better for you than smoking was. We're fighting this. We're fighting for more regulations. Hopefully things will get better over time. But the reality is, don't think that if you vape, you can get off cigarettes, remembering that vaping products have nicotine too, and as they evolve, it gets worse. Okay. So now we're down to stress. Any of you stressed? I'm not stressed. Well, I would be giving this presentation perhaps. Okay, stress is an issue for many people. If we are stressed, we basically don't take care of ourselves as well as we should. Stress can take over our life and make it very unpleasant. So basically, if we're stressed, we want to get out of it for all kinds of sakes. Our heart, our brain, everything doesn't do as well when we're stressed. So what do? Well, first of all, we find out what's causing us the stress if we are stressed. And we may well need help to do it, because unless it's this very small minor stress that you can identify yourself and go, gee, if I do this differently, I quit my job, this will happen to me. Sometimes you can, but oftentimes you can't. So talk to people. It might be your best friend. It might be somebody in the workplace if it were a workplace issue, not for you guys much anymore, but you never know. It could be a professional if you need to, but somebody who can sit down, be objective and say, okay, these are the issues. What could you do to make it better? Have 2 or 3 alternatives, have a plan, and deal with the stress. You can't ignore stress for any length of time, because it'll come back and it'll kind of eat at you, and you don't want that to happen. So learn how to deal with it, learn coping skills to be able to deal with it. Take care of yourself when you're stressed, because your body is fighting that stress. So you need to be even more attentive to your self-care. So physical activity, eating, diet, all of those things become even more key. One that's not up there that should be up there is get your sleep, because it's hard when you're stressed to get your sleep, and you want to be able to do that well. Some coping techniques, breathing, meditation are helpful. Going into a forest, if you're me, is like, yes, everything comes down and I feel much better. The idea is finding things that for you calm you down. Talk to people about it. Don't keep your stresses to yourself, because people will be more understanding. It may help you through it if you do talk to people. Try and find things that make you happy. In my case, going into a forest. For you, it might be a hobby. Volunteer work can be really good if you're stressed, because you're doing something good, and that stress takes a smaller piece in your life than it might otherwise do. Laugh. Belly laughing, of course, would just, always calms us down no matter how stressed we are. And from time to time, get away from it all. Be it a staycation, a vacation, whatever it takes from your normal routine, because we do need to recharge our batteries every once in a while, and that helps. Now, interestingly enough, we've just been through the pandemic and high stress period for many people. And there's a researcher at Heart and Stroke, Dr. Bagley, who basically came up with a very interesting thought, I thought. You take the brain that we showed you before, and she says that in periods of high stress, we go into caveman brain, which is in fact like a hunkering down. You watch your Netflix with your blanket on top of you and sort of basically just try and have it go away. And she said you can do that for a short period of time, but for any period of high stress, and pandemic being the extreme example, you can't do it forever. You have to at some point get out, pull the blanket out, do something else. And what she's saying is tap your brain to do it better. And it's that frontal lobe brain that she's saying helps us make good decisions. So therefore, keep it charged, because it's kind of like a battery. It can actually lose its charge by getting enough sleep, by a daily routine, so that our brain doesn't have to keep making decisions all the time. And I know in pandemic, it really helped me to have a breakfast time, an exercise time, a lunch time. The brain doesn't have to think as much, and so therefore it does better. Healthy habits, so eating well, exercising, and building it into your routine. She talked about limiting media time, because in fact, bad news in periods of high stress can make it even more depressing. She talked equally about staying in the moment. It's never a good idea, and it can be very stressful if we look back at everything we could have done better some other way. Looking back, the best thing we can do is learn from it, but we can't change it. Looking forward in a period of high stress could be totally useless, because it could change tomorrow, as we saw in the pandemic. So in fact, a staying in the moment focus can really help us deal in the periods of high stress. Connections. Social connections at any point are good for us. So in fact, I didn't mention an exercise, and I should have. When you're doing your exercise, try and do it with other people. Do things with other people, because all that social stuff is good for our frontal lobe brain, but it's also good for us, period, for all of our health needs. And finally, be kind to yourself and to others. In periods of high stress, people are not performing at their peak by and large. So you're not going to be 100%, other people are not. So be kind to each other, be kind to yourself. And that really does help in periods of stress. Okay, now we have alcohol. Alcohol is interesting, because I changed the slide dramatically yesterday, because the slides would have said, and many other organizations said, that we could drink up to 1 to 2 glasses of alcohol a day, up to 10 a week, etc., etc. It's changed completely, because as of this year, and you guys may have seen this in media, there has been a study done by the Addictions Research Foundation, I forget their exact name, funded by Health Canada, that have kindly come out and said, all alcohol is risky. So basically, be real careful when you take alcohol for all kinds of good reasons. So what we have here is what's currently sitting on the Heart and Stroke website. So basically, drinking too much alcohol can increase your blood pressure, and increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. So we know that. So any amount of alcohol can increase our risk. To the degree we don't know yet, because Heart and Stroke is doing some more research to try and figure it out. Because those of you who looked at those guidelines, who may have seen it in the press, saw that they're basically around all kinds of things: cancer, violence, all kinds of things like that. But what Heart and Stroke is looking for now is, where is it specifically touching the heart based on those studies? So what their current advice is if you're going to drink alcohol, drink it in small amounts. And that's always to some degree been advised, because binge drinking has always been a risk for stroke. So bottom line is small amounts, pace yourself, don't have too much at a time, and try and drink water in between any alcohol so that you're drinking far less of it. Be tuned, because things will be coming out on this topic from Heart and Stroke in the media, elsewhere, because a lot of organizations that I've looked on their websites are fudging it the same way as Heart and Stroke is, because they're kind of all looking at the data at the moment and going, okay, how does this apply to my medical conditions? So the Cancer Society will come out with more. Everyone will all say more as time passes. But for the moment, that's where we're sitting. So be cautious. Oh, and the other thing I would add on alcohol is, as time has evolved, even before this study, many organizations across Canada have been saying things like, as we age, we should be reducing our intake of alcohol anyway, because alcohol seems to be worse as we age. So again, caution if you are a drinker. The other slide I have in front of you is the other risk of that nature, and it's recreational drug use. And it talks to things that most of you would probably never go near, but it says clearly that if you take those kinds of drugs, your risk of stroke goes up 6 times higher, and that the stroke can occur shortly after the event. Now, I'm sure most of you are not cocaine addicts and all the rest of it, but I suspect that many of you may well take cannabis or marijuana now that is legal, and it's either gummies or it's whatever for pain or for whatever. And I was reading up more about it because I wanted to see the specific piece. And right now, what the Heart and Stroke Foundation site says is there's not enough credible research to draw any real conclusions over time. So they're continuing to look. They're seeing some risks for heart disease and stroke, but nothing as big as what I have here on this slide is what the site says for recreational drugs together. So if you are a cannabis user, the advice is currently talk to your doctor. With everything else that's going on in your life, try and think, is this good for me? Should I be limiting? Because sometimes the benefits may outweigh any risks. So if you are into cannabis or marijuana, talk to your healthcare professional to get advice from them. Okay, now we're talking about 4 conditions that are there and will create us risks, and we've talked about these before, so there's nothing that's particularly new because I've been talking about them throughout this presentation, except atrial fibrillation. So let's quickly go through. Blood pressure. Blood pressure, I think you all know, if you don't know, is 2 numbers when the doctor talks to you and says 120 over 80, 125 over 85. What that means is when you think your blood is pumping and the cuff is going in, the high number is when it's pumping, and the low number is when it's at rest. So that's what blood pressure is measuring. High blood pressure is the number 1 risk factor for stroke and a major risk factor for heart disease. So it's something that we want to keep under control. And it is more bothersome because you can't really have symptoms of blood pressure except at the very high levels of it. So bottom line is, it's something that can creep up on you and can kill if you don't do anything about it. What do we do about blood pressure? Well, 1, we make sure we check it at least every year. Either the doctor will do it for you. If you don't see a doctor every year, at least go to pharmacies and make sure you know what it is. In the area of 120 over 80, no one worries. In the area below that, doctors seem to worry only in the very low levels for seniors because sometimes it makes them weaker and they want them to bring it up. Where you worry is when you're about 140 over 90 and higher is when doctors are going to medicate and want you to bring it down. But in the meantime, in the weirdities, you're talking about taking care of yourself better, those behavioral changes. Sodium, keep it down to no more than a teaspoon of sodium per day. And sodium includes more than salt. If you look at a can of soup, the sodium count can be real high all by itself. So watch your sodium. Be physically active and manage your alcohol, and you can keep your blood pressure under control. And as I could add to that, smoking, because that's also a risk to that. The second one we want to watch for is cholesterol. And we've talked about cholesterol 3 or 4 times in this presentation. It's going to be responsible for the plaque. It increases our risk for heart attacks and strokes. So we want to do something about keeping our bad cholesterol number down and our good cholesterol number up. So we want to keep the good number up by eating healthy fats, omega-3, reducing our saturated fats. We want lots of fiber in our life coming from fruit and vegetables, coming from good grains, and we want to be physically active. And if we do those things, we're doing a great big deal towards keeping ourselves healthy. Now, diabetes is a big risk factor, there's no question. And some of you live with it all of your lives with diabetes type 1. And diabetes type 1, in fact, is the body's inability to produce enough insulin. And so it creates issues throughout its life. So it will give you higher blood pressure. It will give you that hardening of the arteries. It will give you coronary artery disease. It'll give you stroke. It'll give you circulation problems. So in other words, it's hard. And for women, it adds the double whammy that we who are protected by our estrogen are less protected when you've got diabetes, because they don't have that protection if they have diabetes type 1. But the other problem with diabetes is that you can acquire diabetes, and it's diabetes type 2. If we're not careful. And if we acquire diabetes type 2, we end up with the same kinds of risks as those people who had diabetes all of their life. And basically the risks are there. And what do we do to avoid getting diabetes if we don't have it already? Physical activity, keeping our weight under control, and really watching our sugar. And our sugar, really, where you can get it without realizing it, is in drinks. A lot of the soft drinks, juices that are good sugars, but they're still sugars. We really have to watch how much sugar we're taking in our life to prevent getting them. So if we do those kinds of things, we can help each other out. Now, I'm just going to go back on one slide because I want to tell you about atrial fibrillation. And atrial fibrillation is a condition which it basically has an irregular heart rhythm known as arrhythmia. So basically, your heart can beat really, really fast, come down, beat really, really fast. And doing this, if you have AFib, is basically making your risk of stroke grow. It's making your risk of stroke grow when you have other conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, or heart disease already, and as we age. The thing about atrial fibrillation is for every decade of life, our risk goes up. So that 3 to 5 gets to be 5 as we get to be older. So it's something you want to watch and talk to your doctor about if it's something. You can't control this through your diet or through anything like that, though you can control diabetes, high blood pressure through your diet. So there is a link. Having said that, though, how do you know you have AFib? Well, it's a relatively simple thing to do. If you take your pulse, and if you're taking your pulse and you've got beat, 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 skip, beat, 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 skip kind of thing, if you've got those skipping beats, talk to your doctor about it because it might well be atrial fibrillation. Also, if you've got these really high spikes of pulse going way up, again, talk to your doctor. They may be talking to you about it as well. So having said that, work with them and make sure that this is one risk that's under control. It can be medicated. You can be watched. It'll be good. So basically, those 4 conditions are things that can get you into trouble if we don't watch them. So we want to watch them. We want to be talking to doctors on a regular basis, especially as we age, so that they don't become an issue for us. Okay, and there's a few risk factors that are the women-specific ones. I've mentioned menopause and estrogen. Women can have issues when they're on birth control and have other kinds of risk factors. I doubt this would touch this audience, but you never know. Women have problems within pregnancy, which can cause us later problems. I mentioned preeclampsia earlier, but there's gestational diabetes, which can cause us issues later, pregnancy-related stroke, peripartum cardiomyopathy, and cause us issues later in life. So some of the things that happen to us in our life as women can cause us grief later on. And menopause, I've mentioned already. And if you are in menopause and you take treatments that are hormone replacement treatments, as some doctors will prescribe, that also does increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. Okay, so we're through the risks. Meg, can I open it for a second and just see what is in the queue at the moment before I close?
Sure, yeah, we don't have too much. There is one question here about, so going back to diet and health. Fat specifically. So is dairy fat, 2% milk, 14% sour cream, etc., bad for your heart?
Yes. It's like anything. I mean, in moderation, everything is fine. In too much, no. They are saturated fats. And if you look at milk, cream, etc., when putting it in your coffee, you've got full cream that can be 10 or 15% of milk fats. And then you work your way down into skim that doesn't have any. So 4%, 3%, 2%, 1%. So basically the calcium and all that stuff in the dairy product comes. The fat is saturated fat. So bottom line is when you're doing your dairy, yeah, you're taking in saturated fats. So that's a reality of the game. Did I get the whole question on that one? Sorry, I thought it.
Yes, yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
And then someone is just sharing about the Mind and Brain Institute in Ottawa, who has done some research that shows that after a TIA or stroke, depression is often a result. They've done research to find what drug will increase the blood flow in the brain to reduce or eliminate depression. So it looks like there's some stuff going on there, and you're nodding along. So is that something you guys are aware of?
Completely aware of it. Think about it. And those of you who have had strokes will know this. There's no question at all. You lose function, whatever function you lose. My volunteer who had a hemorrhagic stroke will never again speak French. She never got that piece back. She cannot sing "O Canada" after many years of trying. When you have a stroke, you're basically losing function. A TIA shouldn't depress you by itself because, in fact, nothing changes except you've been warned that you're vulnerable, which can depress you all by yourself. But if you have the conditions, and it does not exclusive to stroke, you can also get this from heart attacks too, because you've lost function, you've lost energy, your life changes, but it changes particularly in a stroke. And I'm just going to go forward one slide because I want to show you something. Heart and stroke does something called power of community. Now, when people come out of a stroke, yes, depression is part of it because your life is changing. And depression might not be just the individual who's had a stroke. It might well be the person taking care of that person, the loved one, because in fact, it changes everyone's life. Perhaps you can't move one side of your body anymore. You can't see. I mean, whatever you've lost in a stroke will come back to some degree. If we can identify it quickly, rehab can step in. There's been less damage because we found it quickly. Rehab comes in and you get some of that function back. If you're lucky, you get all of it back. But many times after a stroke, and especially if the stroke took a while to find, you've lost a function. Therefore, you can't do it anymore. That's depressing, no matter how you choose it. So yeah, those studies of depression wouldn't shock me at all. What I find interesting is something that Heart and Stroke has done, other than publications and stuff like that to try and support people, but they're bringing people together in something they call the power of community. And what it is two versions of self-help groups, I guess is the nicest way of putting it. One is for caregivers and one is for people who are dealing with the issues themselves. And they come together virtually from across Canada and they talk to each other about what's going right, what's going wrong, how to fix it, and all the rest of what goes there. And that can help things like depression, and they will take advice in those groups far better than they might even take them from their families, particularly, or from even health professionals in some instances, because people are in the same boat as they are. But one caution I would make, and it's coming from another slide, I think I have it close by. I did. We women are less likely to help ourselves at the tail end of that, less likely to participate in rehab, less likely to go for the tools that can help us. We're just super women, right? So depression can hit even greater when you're talking about things like that. So I'm not surprised at the comment at all. I would encourage anyone who's had to deal with stroke to look into these powers of communities and see if they help. The community numbers are there, and the comments we get are unbelievable as to people who feel more supported. Now, we have in Canada the stroke strategy, and that as well helps people deal with these issues, but people have to partake in what's there because, in fact, their life has changed, and in many cases, it will not come back to where it was before. So yeah, there are issues to deal with coming from that. Okay, what else have you got?
Let's keep going. That's it for now. There's a few other things, but let's just wrap up the presentation.
Okay, I think I've been kind of wrapping up as I played with my slides, but that's okay. All right, so what can you do? Well, first of all, you've just heard a whole lot of information. You've made it into this elevated senior age, so you're doing something right, right? If you were not, you would be having more issues, but you still have things you might have heard today that go, maybe I want to do a little bit something of this, or validated something you're doing really well. So what can you do? Know the signs of heart attacks and strokes and what to do. That you can get off our website. I would give you publications, but we are virtual, so I can't do it today. But take a look, make sure you know what they are and what to do. You can put something up on your fridge to remind you. Make sure you know what FAST means. Face, arms, speech, time. Do those. Look at risk factors. Now, if you go on the Heart and Stroke website, which I would encourage you to use, risk factors, you can assess your risks, and by assessing your risks with the tool that's there, you can then get advice on how to manage those risks. So I would encourage you to know what your risk factors are, which you can control, which you cannot, and what to do about them. Make sure you know your numbers for things like blood pressure, cholesterol. If you're dealing with diabetes, sugars as well. Know that stuff. And if doctors prescribe medication, please take it. Because in fact, things like blood pressure, one of the big issues is people not taking it because there are no symptoms. And people tend to knee jerk and take medicine when it hurts and not when it doesn't. So take your meds, they're important. If you haven't learned CPR, I would encourage you to take a course. Sometimes if you're older, they won't give it to certain age groups, but if you can, do. And even if you can't, take heart at what I just said today. It's not that hard to do. And if you're caught in a situation and you're by yourself, give it a shot. You can only help. I would encourage you to volunteer. I probably get more out of volunteering for heart and stroke than I ever give. So having said that, it's a good place. And a lot of the organizations, ours and others, are struggling since pandemic with volunteers. So if it's in you, really good if you're dealing with stress. So please volunteer. Heart and Stroke is an organization you should donate to. We do extremely good work that helps you in your life. And I would encourage you to use our website tools. I've mentioned the risk assessment. There's also a whole lot of recipes that you can get that are heart healthy that will make your life easier. There's a stress assessment tool, which you could do and get advice from that. That's useful as well. And you can also join a newsletter so that in your inbox every month will pop in recipes, advice, all kinds of things, and stuff on new research that might interest you to go out and find out more. The more you know, the more you can protect yourself. So I would encourage you to use the resources we've got to your benefit. Okay. And into the donation vein, just know that if we come and hit on you for things like Ride for Heart, really good cause. It's how I got into heart and stroke in the first place. That's one good way of us raising our money. We also raise money through things like Jump Rope for Heart. So if your grandkids, your kids, or others come seeing you, remember this is a really good activity. And what's really good about it is we're teaching kids how to eat healthy and their parents through the documentation so that we teach the skills early so that the next generation will do it even better than we've been doing it. And if you're into really helping back and you want to organize something, if you want to do a golf tournament or run, anything that interests you, talk to Heart and Stroke. We love people who come up forward to help out because this is a cause. There's so much research still to be done. All your dollars really, really help. We appreciate them. And with that, that is me. So I think, Meg, we're good in the chat?
Yeah, just one question someone asked, which is good for all of us to know, is do you know of a good Zoom course on CPR or the best place to send people if they want to learn CPR?
Wow. CPR courses by and large are given by municipalities. And so you can usually get a course in person through your municipality. A virtual course is interesting. One thing I could share with you, it's not a full course, but it is basically a little video. It's a YouTube kind of thing that's useful, and it actually plays Staying Alive along with it. So bottom line is I could give you that, Meg, and you could share with the parties that are there. And in the meantime, I will check to see what is available. Is there an audience across Canada? I suspect it is.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can find something else as to where to get CPR courses elsewhere virtually, because that makes a lot of sense in this environment. Although, if you can get a real course, that you've got real people and somebody sort of watching you and saying, well, you're pushing hard enough, those kinds of things, that's useful. There's no question. So if you can get a course in a room, my gut is you'll do better, but you'll learn it even if you don't. And even if you just basically listen to that little video, it tells you what you need to do what I described today. So it's the way to go. But let's figure out if I can give you guys anything more on top of that video and add to what I give to Meg.
Perfect. And I've taken a lot of my CPR courses through the paramedics and also the City of Ottawa. So if you go to any community center and ask them, they'll be able to provide that.
Absolutely. And the City of Ottawa is where I actually have gotten my last ones as well. And they're useful. And, many of us have CPR from way back when, where they taught the full blown, mark, do, breaths, all the rest of it. And at the end of the day, we still have to practice because this is a skill we don't use very often. And of course, like anything else, the simpler it is, the more we're likely to remember it, which is why I like the new method that's there for that reason.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Moyra. I want to thank you so much for all your knowledge and all that you've shared today. This has just been, you're just such a wealth of knowledge and a wonderful presenter. So I'm just seeing a lot of people saying thank yous and how much they've learned. So thank you so much for your time and expertise. And I know that everyone has really benefited from today's presentation. So many thanks.
No worries, Meg. It's a pleasure doing it. Thanks to the audience for their participation. I really appreciate it. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Take care of yourselves and all the best.
Hi again, everyone. I just want to add a few final words before we leave. So again, we want to thank Moyra and Meg for the wonderful presentation. And I just want to remind everyone that we will be sending out a follow-up email, which will include information on how to access the recording of today's webinar. And it'll include the information that Moyra mentioned, like the video and any other contact information or information about the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and see you at our next webinar. Bye, everyone.